In the cold shadow of a city that never sleeps, two lives, worlds apart, collided in a dark alley on a stormy night. A young girl, hardened by the streets and carrying a heart far too big for her small body, refused to look away. A powerful man, drowning in the silence of his own success, found salvation in the courage of a child he didn't even know. This is the story of Nia, a girl who taught a billionaire that the truest kind of wealth has nothing to do with money. And David, a man who learned that second chances are built not with power, but with compassion. It's a story of resilience, of trust slowly forged in the coldest corners of the city, and of a promise that no one, no matter how lost, is ever truly invisible. Stay with us until the end, because sometimes the smallest acts of courage can light the way for us all. David McAllister had long been hailed as a visionary, a man who could peer into the future and shape it to his will. His face was a fixture on magazine covers, a testament to his empire built from nothing more than code and dreams. They called him the Tech King of the Coast, a title he wore with quiet pride. But if you looked past the headlines, past the golden watch he never took off, an heirloom from his father, you'd find a man haunted by an emptiness no fortune could fill. In the quiet hours of the night, when the glow of the city faded and the only sound was the whisper of the ocean wind against his glass balcony, David's thoughts always returned to Eliza, his daughter. Eliza, the girl who had once giggled on his knee, the girl who had looked at him as if he were the center of her world. But that was before the boardrooms and the billion-dollar deals, before he let success become a fortress that shut her out. He had told himself it was all for her, every late night, every missed birthday, every broken promise. But the truth was simpler and far crueler. He had let the chase of ambition become the only voice he listened to. Eliza had left 3 years ago. No more tearful phone calls or letters that smelled of lavender. She had taken her mother's name back and vanished into the world, leaving him with nothing but a single photograph. Her in the garden, hair tangled in the breeze, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. He kept that photo in the top drawer of his office, beneath a mountain of contracts. Sometimes, he would open it late at night, the paper edges worn soft by his fingers, and wonder what she would think if she saw him now, a man revered by the world, but unknown to his own daughter. On the night everything changed, David was returning from yet another dinner with shareholders. It had been a celebration, some new partnership inked, another feather in his gilded cap. He had smiled for the cameras, shaken hands, toasted with crystal glasses. But as soon as the last flashbulb had dimmed, he had excused himself, citing exhaustion. The truth was he couldn't bear to be there another moment, surrounded by laughter that wasn't real. The car was waiting for him, the driver standing stiffly by the door. But David dismissed him with a wave, needing air, needing to feel the night wrap around him like a balm. He turned away from the main avenue, his polished shoes clicking against rain-slick pavement. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he needed to keep moving. The city around him pulsed with life. Neon signs flickered, laughter spilled from crowded bars, and somewhere a saxophone played a lazy tune that curled through the damp air. David walked aimlessly, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. The farther he wandered from the well-lit streets, the more the city revealed its underbelly. Here the pavement was cracked, and the streetlights flickered like dying stars. Windows were boarded up, and the scent of salt and rust clung to the air. He should have turned back, but something in him, some quiet desperation, pushed him forward. In a narrow alley near the waterfront, the glow of a lone bulb revealed graffiti scrawled across a brick wall. "We are not invisible." The words, half faded and defiant, made him pause. He thought of Eliza, of how she had screamed at him the last time they spoke. "I'm not invisible, Dad. I won't let you make me that way." The memory cut through him like glass. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the figures in the alley until it was too late. 2 men, faces shadowed by hoods, emerged from the darkness. One was tall and thin, a silver chain glinting at his throat. The other was broader, his hands already balled into fists. David froze. For a moment, he thought he could bluff his way out, offer them money, anything. But the taller one just sneered. "Pretty watch, old man," he said, nodding at the heirloom on David's wrist. "Hand it over." David's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but no words came. He felt the cool metal of the watch, felt his father's memory in every link of the chain. "Please," he managed. his voice cracking. "This watch, it belonged to my father." The broad one stepped closer, close enough that David could smell the sour tang of sweat. "Then he won't mind if we borrow it," he growled. The taller man's hand shot out, fingers like claws, and ripped the watch from David's wrist. Pain lanced through him. More than physical, a tearing of something deep inside. He stumbled back, his breath ragged, and for a moment he thought they would be done. But the broad one punched him hard in the gut, knocking the air from his lungs. David crumpled to the wet ground, coughing, the taste of copper on his tongue. The world blurred around the edges, and he thought distantly, "This is how it ends." Not in the boardroom or the headlines, but in a filthy alley where no one would even care. As he lay there, the men turned to leave, their laughter echoing against the walls. That's when he saw her, a small silhouette half hidden behind a stack of crates, hair coiled in tight curls, eyes wide and terrified. A girl, no more than 12, her face smudged with dirt, clutching a frayed backpack to her chest. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Their eyes locked, and in that brief second, David saw something in her gaze, something fierce and unbreakable. He wanted to tell her to run, to save herself, but he couldn't find the breath. The girl stepped out from the shadows. Her voice, small but steady, cut through the night. "Leave him alone." The men turned, amusement flickering across their faces. "What's this?" the taller one mocked. "A little mouse come to play hero?" The girl didn't flinch. Her hands trembled, but she stood her ground, her gaze locked on David like he was the only thing that mattered. For David, time warped around that moment. The rain, the pain, the two men's laughter, all of it fell away. All he saw was her, standing between him and the darkness. In that single heartbeat, he felt the weight of every moment he had failed his own daughter, every time he had chosen ambition over love. And in the eyes of this girl, he saw a chance. Maybe not for redemption, but for something close. The taller man took a step toward her, the chain at his throat glinting like a blade. "Run along, little girl," he said softly. But she didn't. She didn't run. And David, lying broken on the cold ground, felt something stir in his chest. Hope. Small and fragile, but alive. The girl didn't flinch. The cold wind tangled in her hair, and she lifted her chin a fraction of an inch, as if that small gesture could stand between her and the men who had just stolen from him and broken his ribs. David watched her through half-closed eyes, every breath a shallow rasp, and he felt a kind of awe rise in him. She was so small, so fragile, and yet in that moment, she looked like she could stand against the world. "I said leave him alone," she repeated, her voice low but steady. The taller man laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed off the alley walls. "Or what, kid?" he taunted, stepping closer, the glint of metal from a chain wrapped around his fist. The girl didn't move, her knuckles whitened around the frayed strap of her backpack. For a moment, David wanted to call out, tell her to run, to disappear back into the shadows before they turned on her too. But he couldn't find the strength to speak, his throat raw from the blow he had taken. The broad man reached for her, a hand like a meat hook closing around empty air, as she twisted away, quick as a street cat. She darted to the side, her small body weaving through the stacks of crates with a speed that made the man curse under his breath. "Little rat," he spat, but his voice was tinged with frustration. She wasn't fighting back. She was distracting them, David realized in a daze, keeping them from him, giving him those precious seconds to breathe. He pressed his palms into the wet pavement, forcing himself upright inch by inch, each movement sending sparks of pain down his spine. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't leave her alone to face them. The taller man lunged for her again, but she ducked beneath his outstretched arms, and he stumbled against the wall. "Stupid brat!" he roared. But she didn't stop. She turned her head just enough to catch David's eyes. In that fleeting glance, he saw the fear there, real and sharp, but also something else. Determination. She wouldn't leave him, even though every instinct must be screaming at her to run. That look broke something open in David's chest. He found his voice, cracked and ragged. "Run," he croaked. "Please, just run." But the girl didn't move. Her shoulders squared, and she took a step closer to him instead of away. "No," she said, her voice like steel. "I won't let them hurt you anymore." The taller man recovered, his face twisted in a snarl. He swung at her with the chain, a vicious arc of metal that whistled through the air. She dodged, barely, stumbling as the chain scraped her shoulder. Pain flared across her face, but she didn't make a sound. David felt a cry catch in his throat. She was just a child, and yet she stood there like a warrior. He pushed himself up to his knees, every muscle screaming in protest. "Stop!" he rasped, his voice shaking. "Leave her alone! Take whatever you want! Just leave her!" The broad man turned to him, lips curling. "You think you get to make the rules, old man?" he sneered. But David saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation. Maybe they hadn't expected resistance. Maybe they hadn't expected a girl with fire in her eyes. The taller man's snarl deepened. "I'm done with this," he spat, and raised the chain again. Before he could swing, a new sound cut through the night, the shrill wail of a police siren somewhere nearby, faint but growing. The taller man's head snapped up, and for a heartbeat, he froze. The broad man cursed, his shoulders tensing. "Cops!" he hissed. The taller man glanced at David, at the girl, and spat on the ground. "Not worth it," he muttered. And just like that, they turned and melted back into the darkness of the alley, footsteps fading into the rain. Silence fell, broken only by the girl's ragged breathing. David let out a shuddering breath, collapsing back against the wall. The pain was a white-hot brand across his ribs, but he forced his eyes open, needing to see her. She stood there, trembling, her hands still clenched around the backpack. Rainwater ran in rivulets down her face, mingling with the dirt and the faint smear of blood where the chain had grazed her. Slowly, she turned to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft now, stripped of the defiance she'd shown the men. David swallowed hard, his throat raw. You saved me," he whispered, wonder and disbelief warring in his voice. She shrugged, a small, uncertain gesture. "They would have killed you," she said simply. Her eyes dropped to the ground, as if she was ashamed of the attention. David's heart ached at the sight. He forced himself to sit up straighter, wincing with every breath. "What's your name?" he asked, voice shaking. She hesitated, then lifted her gaze to meet his. "Nia," she said quietly. "My name's Nia." The name felt like a gift, something fragile and precious. "Thank you, Nia," David said, the words tasting strange on his tongue. He had said thank you 1,000 times in boardrooms and interviews, but never like this, never with such weight. Nia shifted on her feet, her eyes darting down the alley, as if expecting the men to return. "You need to get out of here," she murmured. "The police, they're coming." David nodded, though he could barely think past the pain and the haze of shock. Will you stay?" he asked, not ready to let her slip away into the shadows again. For a moment, she hesitated, those dark eyes searching his face. Then she shook her head. "I can't," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I can't be here when they come." David opened his mouth to protest, but she was already turning away, slipping back into the night like a phantom. He watched her go, her small frame swallowed by the darkness, and something inside him fractured. He didn't even know if he'd see her again, but he knew, deep in his bones, that he had to try, that she had given him more than his life back. She had given him a glimpse of something he had thought he'd lost forever. Faith in the goodness of people, even in the unlikeliest of places, and he would not let that go. David sat slumped against the wall long after Nia's small figure vanished into the night. The cold seeped through his soaked clothes, and the ache in his ribs had grown from a sharp sting to a dull, throbbing weight. But none of it mattered. All he could think about was her, the girl with the fire in her eyes and the quiet strength in her voice. Her name echoed in his head, Nia. He forced himself to stand, using the brick wall for support, every breath a struggle. The sirens grew louder, swirling red and blue lights painting the alley in color. A police cruiser screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, doors flung open. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, their boots splashing through puddles. "Sir, are you injured?" One of them barked, and David managed a small nod, his face pale in the flickering lights. A paramedic appeared moments later, her hands sure and efficient as she checked his injuries. "You're lucky," she said quietly, her fingers brushing against the cut on his cheek. "Those men did a number on you." David didn't respond. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment Nia had stepped forward, small and defiant, as if she had been born for that single act of courage. "There was a girl," he rasped, his voice hoarse. She saved me." The paramedic paused, tilting her head. "A girl?" she echoed. "Do you know her?" David shook his head. "No, she was young, dark skin, curly hair. She couldn't have been more than 12. The paramedic's brow furrowed. "Did she run away before we got here?" He nodded again. "She did," he whispered. She didn't even tell me her last name, just Nia. The paramedic exchanged a look with one of the officers. "We'll keep an eye out," the officer said, though his tone was kind but distant. In a city like this, kids like Nia fell through the cracks all the time. David saw it in the officer's eyes. To them, she was just another street kid, a ghost who would disappear by dawn. But to him, she was the reason he was still breathing. "Find her," he said, his voice suddenly fierce, surprising even himself. "Please, she's just a child." The officer gave a small nod, but David could see it was more out of pity than real intent. The world had taught them that kids like Nia didn't want to be found. But David refused to accept that. As the paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, he clutched at the medic's sleeve. "Promise me," he said, his voice trembling. "Promise me you'll look for her." "I promise," the medic said softly, though her eyes flickered with doubt. David lay back against the hard plastic, the alley ceiling spinning above him, and let the darkness take him. He woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic burning in his nostrils. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a distant mechanical beep counting out the seconds of his heartbeat. Pain radiated through his chest, but he ignored it, forcing his eyes open, scanning the room for any sign of her. But there was nothing, just white walls and the muted hum of machines. A nurse appeared at his side, her smile gentle but professional. "Mr. McAllister, you're in St. Mary's Medical," she said in a soft voice. "You had a mild concussion and some cracked ribs, but you're going to be okay." David tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. "The girl, Nia," he croaked. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the chart in her hands. "I don't know anything about a girl, sir," she said. "The police didn't bring anyone else in with you." Her words were a gut punch, but he swallowed the pain. Of course she was gone. A child like Nia wouldn't trust uniforms, wouldn't linger in bright, sterile hallways. She belonged to the shadows, to the half-seen corners of the city. But he couldn't let it go. For the first time in years, David felt something more than the hollow thrum of deals and deadlines. He felt purpose. When he was finally released, he stepped out of the hospital into the early morning light. The city washed clean by the night's rain. The air was sharp and cold, but he drew it in like a man reborn. He didn't go home. He didn't even call his driver. Instead, he walked. Every step was slow, deliberate, as if he was testing the ground beneath him. He walked back to the alley where it had all begun. In the early dawn, it looked almost peaceful. No sign of the violence that had stained its bricks. No trace of the girl who had saved his life. But he stood there anyway, head bowed, as if the memory of her lingered in the air. "I'll find you," he whispered, though there was no one to hear it. "I owe you that much." The next days blurred into a single driving obsession. David didn't tell anyone, not his assistants, not the board, not even the few friends he still had. He spent his days combing the city's edges, shelters and soup kitchens, street corners and bus stations. He learned the rhythms of those hidden places, the quiet codes of survival. He carried a photo of Nia in his mind, though he had no picture to hold. "Have you seen a girl?" he asked again and again, his voice gentle, never demanding. "She's small, about 12, curly hair, dark skin. Her name's Nia." Some people shook their heads. Others looked at him with wary curiosity, as if wondering why a man in a tailored coat was searching for a child no one else noticed. But he didn't care how it looked. He remembered her eyes, the way they had burned with something fierce and bright in that alley. He remembered how she had stood between him and danger, her small frame defiant in the face of cruelty. And he knew he couldn't let that vanish into the dark. At night, he lay in bed in his penthouse overlooking the harbor, staring at the ceiling as the city lights blinked like distant stars. He had spent a lifetime chasing power and prestige, but none of it mattered anymore, not compared to finding the girl who had saved his life with nothing more than her courage. He didn't know how long it would take. He didn't know if she would even let him find her. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't stop, because for the first time in his life, he saw that some debts could never be paid with money or influence. Some debts were written in the soul, and his soul, he realized, was in debt to a girl named Nia. David's days took on a rhythm that was both foreign and strangely liberating. Every morning, he rose before dawn, the sky outside his window still streaked with the last embers of night. He traded his tailored suits for jeans and a plain jacket, shedding the armor of his wealth as he stepped into the world beyond his polished floors and high-rise walls. Each day he mapped the hidden edges of the city with the patience of a cartographer. Alleys that stank of brine and oil, doorways that served as beds for the forgotten, soup kitchens where the line of the hungry never seemed to end. He moved through these places with quiet determination, his eyes scanning every face, every hunched shoulder, searching for a girl with a name like a whisper. Nia. He spoke to the volunteers at the shelters, their hands always busy ladling soup or sorting clothes. He learned their names: Marisol at the mission house, who wore a cross around her neck and never stopped smiling; Big Joe at the dockside kitchen, whose laughter boomed like a foghorn. "Have you seen her?" David would ask softly, showing them a sketch he'd had an artist draw from memory, a young girl with tight curls and solemn eyes. "Her name is Nia. She saved my life." Some shook their heads with regret. Others simply looked away. "A lot of kids like that," Big Joe said one night, his face gentle but tired. "They come and go like the tide, never long enough for us to really know them." But David didn't stop. In the boardroom, he had been relentless. He'd built empires, navigated markets no one else understood. Now, he turned that same tenacity to the search for a child who had once stood between him and death. He learned how to listen in these places, how to let silence fill the gaps between questions. Sometimes he'd see a flicker of recognition in someone's eyes, a woman in a battered coat who murmured, "I think I saw her near the docks, sleeping under the pilings." A boy no older than 15 who said, "She doesn't trust no one. She's smart, real smart." These were the threads he followed, weaving them together into a map of hope. At night, he returned to the penthouse that felt emptier with each passing day. The view was the same, ships winking in the harbor, the skyline glittering like a promise, but it no longer felt like his world. He found himself standing at the window for hours, remembering the way Nia had looked at him in that alley, not with pity or fear, but with something fierce and bright that had cut through the fog of his own failures. One night, unable to sleep, he went back to the alley. The rain had washed the grime from the walls, leaving them glistening under the flickering street lamp. He closed his eyes and let the memory of her fill him, the way her small hand had gripped that backpack like a lifeline, the way she had said, "I won't let them hurt you anymore." It felt like a prayer. As he stood there, a voice called from the shadows, "You're the rich man looking for the girl, ain't you?" He turned, startled, to see an older woman pushing a cart filled with cans. Her eyes were sharp beneath the grime on her face, and she regarded him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "Do you know her?" The woman's gaze flicked to the drawing he held. She studied it, her lips pursing. "Maybe," she said finally. "She's got those eyes, the kind that see too much." David's breath caught. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Anything you can tell me?" The woman sighed, shifting the weight of her cart. "She comes by the dock sometimes, sits quiet, watches the water, never talks much." She hesitated, then added, "I seen her with an old stray dog. She feeds him scraps when she can. That's the kind of girl she is. Got nothing. But she still gives." David closed his eyes for a moment, a surge of gratitude and sorrow washing over him. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for telling me." The woman just shrugged, already turning away. "Don't thank me, mister. Just find her." The next day, David went to the docks. He stood there from dawn until dusk, the wind cold off the water, the scent of salt and rust in the air. He watched the fishing boats come and go, the workers with their rough hands and tired eyes. And then, just as the sun began to set in a blaze of orange and gold, he saw her. She was sitting on the edge of the pier, legs dangling over the water, the stray dog curled at her feet. Her head was bowed, her hair a halo of dark curls against the dying light. David's breath caught in his chest. He walked slowly, each step measured, afraid that if he moved too quickly, she might vanish like a dream. "Nia," he said softly when he was close enough for her to hear. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise and something like fear. You found me," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I told you I would." She looked away, her fingers tightening in the dog's fur. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do you care?" David took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because you saved me," he said simply. "Because in that alley, you didn't see a man with money. You saw a man who was afraid, and you stood between me and the darkness." She didn't say anything, but her shoulders trembled. He knelt beside her, careful to leave a small space between them. "I know I can't make up for everything you've been through," he said, "but I can try to be someone who sees you, really sees you." For a long moment, Nia was silent. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, and their eyes met. In that gaze, he saw the same fierce courage he had glimpsed in the alley, the same spark of defiance, and he knew without doubt that he would spend the rest of his life making sure that spark never went out. The wind off the water was sharp and cold, pulling at the edges of David's coat and stirring the loose strands of Nia's hair into restless waves. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the lapping of the water against the pier and the distant calls of seagulls circling above. David watched her fingers tighten in the stray dog's fur, her small shoulders rigid as if bracing for a storm. He wanted to tell her everything. The gratitude that ached in his chest, the way she had rekindled something he thought he had long since lost. But he also knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. "You don't have to be afraid," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Nia's eyes flicked to his face, wary and skeptical. "People always say that," she muttered, her voice low and guarded. "But it's never true." David's heart ached at her words. How many times had she been promised safety only to be left alone in the cold again? He took a breath, steady and sure, and nodded. "I know," he said softly, "and I won't promise what I can't keep. But I can promise you this. I see you, Nia. I see how strong you are, how brave. And I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to give back what you've already given me." She shifted, her fingers loosening from the dog's fur as she hugged her tattered backpack closer to her chest. "I didn't do anything," she said, almost defiantly. I didn't want to see you die." David's lips curved into the smallest smile, the first real smile he had felt in what seemed like years. "And that was everything," he said. "That moment, it changed everything for me." She looked down, her breath hitching. For a heartbeat, he thought she might bolt, the way so many others had. But instead, she lifted her chin, her dark eyes shining with something raw and vulnerable. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David felt his heart twist. "Now," he said carefully, "I'd like to help you. But only if you let me. No strings, no demands, just help." Her eyes narrowed a fraction, suspicion flickering in their depths. "Why?" she asked again, a note of challenge in her voice. He thought for a moment, choosing each word as if it were a stone he was placing in the foundation of something that had to last. "Because you're worth it," he said finally. "Because someone has to show you that you matter, that you're not invisible." The words hung between them like a fragile bridge, and for a moment David thought she might turn away, her defenses too strong to let him in. But slowly, so slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling, "but just don't expect me to trust you. Not right away." David nodded, his own throat tight. "I don't expect you to," he said. "Trust is earned." They sat in silence after that, the sun dipping lower in the sky and painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. The stray dog shifted, resting its head on Nia's knee, and she absently scratched behind its ears. David watched her, noting the gentle way she moved, the way she never flinched from the animal's rough fur or the cold wind. "Does he have a name?" David asked quietly, nodding at the dog. Nia hesitated, then shrugged. "I call him Echo," she said, "because he's always there, even when no one else is." The name made something in David's chest tighten. Echo, a ghost of sound, a memory that lingered even after the voice was gone. It felt fitting somehow, for a girl who had lived so long in the echoes of other people's indifference. "He's lucky to have you," David said softly. Nia snorted, a tiny sound of disbelief. "I don't know about that," she said. "I barely have enough for myself, let alone him." "And yet you share it anyway," David said. "That's what makes you remarkable." She looked at him, her expression a mix of confusion and something else, something fragile and aching. "Why do you talk like that?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Like I'm special or something?" David hesitated. "Because you are," he said simply. "You're special because you care, even when the world has given you every reason not to." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the last light of day shimmered on the water. "I don't know if I can believe that," she said quietly. "Not yet." "That's okay," David said gently. "Belief takes time." They sat there until the sun disappeared completely, the cold deepening as night claimed the city. When she finally stood, the dog rising beside her, David rose too. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, careful not to push. She shrugged, her small shoulders rising and falling. "I have places," she said, "but they're not good places." David's jaw tightened. "Would you let me help you find a better one?" She didn't answer right away. Then, after a long silence, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "but only if Echo can come too." David smiled, relief and hope flooding through him. "Of course," he said. "Both of you." As they walked away from the water's edge together, Echo padding at Nia's side, David felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. This wasn't about charity or atonement. It was about seeing her, really seeing her, and making sure she knew that someone would stand beside her no matter what. It was about the promise he had made to himself the moment he saw her in that alley, that he would never let her become invisible again. They left the docks behind them, the rhythmic slap of the waves slowly giving way to the murmur of the city at night. David walked a half step behind Nia, careful not to crowd her, giving her the space she seemed to need. The stray dog, Echo, trotted at her side, his tail low but wagging in slow, cautious arcs. David found himself watching the way Nia kept one hand buried in the dog's fur, a lifeline she clung to in the hush of the evening. He could tell she wasn't sure about him yet. Her shoulders still tense, her gaze flitting over her shoulder now and then as if she was waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't blame her. A trust was something hard-won, especially in a world that had given her so little reason to offer it. "Where do you usually sleep?" he asked gently after a while, his voice low so as not to startle her. She hesitated, glancing sideways at him. "Under the bridges mostly," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Sometimes behind the old bakery on 6th. They throw out stale bread late at night, and I can usually get something to eat." David's gut twisted. He had spent his life in penthouses and boardrooms, in restaurants that served food on plates of fine china. The thought of her huddled under a bridge in the freezing dark made his chest ache. Have you ever stayed at one of the shelters?" he asked, careful not to let his voice sound like pity. She shrugged, pulling her thin coat tighter around her. "A couple times," she admitted, "but they're crowded, loud. I don't like all the people." "I understand," he said softly, though the truth was he didn't. Not really, but he wanted to. "I know a place," he said then, the words coming out slow and deliberate. "A safe house. It's small, but it's quiet, clean. You'd have your own space, and Echo could stay with you. It's not charity, Nia. It's just a place to start." She didn't answer right away, her gaze turning inward. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the tug-of-war between instinct and the small flicker of hope that she tried so hard to hide. "How do I know it's not a trick?" she asked finally, her voice small. "How do I know you're not like everyone else?" David took a breath, steadying himself. "You don't," he said honestly. "You don't have to trust me yet. All I ask is that you give me a chance to prove I'm not." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. In that silence, something passed between them, a fragile understanding, the first thread of a bridge he hoped to build. She gave a single small nod. "Okay," she said. "I'll come, just for tonight." Relief swept through him, but he kept his smile gentle, careful. "That's all I ask," he said. They walked in silence for a while longer, the city's neon glow reflecting off puddles in the cracked sidewalks. David led them to a side street, away from the main thoroughfare, to a modest brick building tucked behind a row of shuttered shops. It didn't look like much, no grand entrance, no gleaming marble floors, but it was warm and lit from within, the golden glow of lamps spilling out onto the damp concrete. He paused at the door, turning to her. "This is it," he said. "They won't ask questions. You'll have a bed, a shower, and some food. Echo, too." She looked at the door, then back at him, as if weighing the truth in his voice. Finally, she gave a small nod, and he pushed the door open. The warmth hit them immediately, a soft, comforting heat that chased the chill from their skin. Inside, a woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind a small desk. Her eyes softened when she saw David. "You're back," she said warmly, "and you've brought a friend." David nodded. "This is Nia," he said, "and this is Echo." The woman's smile grew. "Welcome, Nia," she said gently. "Come on in. Let's get you both settled." Nia hovered by the door, her hands still clenched in Echo's fur. She looked so small, so unsure, but she didn't run. That alone felt like a victory. The woman led them down a short hallway to a small room. It was simple: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, a window that looked out onto a tiny courtyard. But it was warm, safe. "This is yours for as long as you need it," the woman said, her voice kind. "I'll bring some fresh towels and a bowl for your friend here." She gave Echo a gentle scratch behind the ears, and he leaned into her touch, tail thumping once. When she was gone, Nia stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it in. She set her backpack down on the floor, her fingers brushing the quilt like she wasn't sure if it was real. David watched her from the doorway, his chest tight with 1,000 unspoken words. "It's not much," he said softly, "but it's a start." She looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes, something almost like peace. "Thank you," she whispered, for this." He shook his head. "No," he said. "Thank you, Nia, for giving me a chance to help, for trusting me, even just a little." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. And in that moment, he knew he would do whatever it took to keep that fragile light in her eyes alive. He would fight for her trust, for her safety, for the chance to prove to her, and to himself, that kindness wasn't just a word in a boardroom pitch. It was a promise, a bond forged in the quiet spaces between two people who had nothing, and yet somehow found everything. David sat in a chair just outside the small room. The door left ajar so he could hear the quiet sounds of Nia moving inside. He didn't want to intrude, didn't want to overwhelm her, but he couldn't bring himself to leave entirely. He listened as she carefully unpacked her tattered backpack, the rustle of worn fabric and the soft thump of a few meager possessions finding their place in the dresser's narrow drawers. Echo padded around the room, sniffing at the corners as if to reassure himself that this was real, that the walls wouldn't close in around them. Every so often, David heard the quiet creak of the bed as Nia sat down, then stood again, as though she didn't quite trust that it would hold her weight. In that small room, the air felt different, warmer, softer, a fragile promise of safety that neither of them dared to name. After a while, the woman from the desk came back with a steaming bowl of soup, a plate of warm bread, and a shallow dish of water for Echo. "Thank you," David said as she set the tray on a small table by the window. She gave him a kind smile. "She's a strong one," she said softly. "I see it in her eyes." David nodded, his throat tight. "She is," he agreed. "She's stronger than most people I've ever met." The woman gave his arm a gentle squeeze before disappearing back down the hallway, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He watched the door, listening as Nia moved closer, her footsteps light on the worn wooden floor. She paused in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the bedside lamp. She was holding a chipped ceramic mug, steam rising in gentle curls from the soup inside. "It's good," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his for just a moment before flicking away. "Hot," David smiled, relief washing over him. "I'm glad," he said. "You need it. You need warmth." She hesitated, then stepped forward, Echo trotting faithfully at her heels. She perched on the edge of the chair across from him, balancing the mug in her hands, as though it might slip through her fingers if she didn't hold it tight enough. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" David drew in a slow breath, letting it settle in his chest. "Because you saved me," he said simply, "and because I see you, Nia. Not just what the world sees, a girl on the streets. I see someone brave, someone who didn't walk away when she could have." She frowned, her brow furrowing. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said. It wasn't anything special. It was everything," David said softly. "You didn't have to help me, but you did, and that means something." She was silent, staring into the steam rising from her mug as if it held answers she couldn't quite grasp. Echo rested his head on her knee, his eyes half closed with contentment. After a long pause, she looked up at him, her gaze uncertain. "What happens now?" she asked. David's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. "Now," he said gently, "now you rest. You eat. You let yourself be warm and safe for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll see where tomorrow takes us." She nodded slowly, as if turning the idea over in her mind like a stone in her palm. "And after tomorrow?" she pressed, her voice steady but edged with fear. What if you change your mind?" David met her gaze, holding it with all the quiet strength he could find. "I won't," he said. "I know I can't make promises for the whole world, but I can make them for me. I won't change my mind about you, Nia." She searched his face for a long moment, as if looking for the smallest crack in his resolve. Finally, she let out a slow breath and nodded. "Okay," she said softly. I'll try to believe you. That's all I ask," he said, his voice just as soft. They sat in silence after that, the room filled with the soft sounds of the world outside, a distant siren, the low hum of the city settling into night. Nia finished her soup slowly, savoring each bite like it was a gift. David watched her, every movement searing itself into his memory. When she was done, she set the empty mug on the table and stood, her shoulders straightening as if bracing herself for something. "I'm tired," she said quietly. I think I need to sleep." "Of course," David said, rising from his chair. "I'll let you rest." She hesitated, then stepped forward and did something that took him completely by surprise. She reached out and laid her hand lightly on his arm, just for a moment, her fingers warm against the sleeve of his jacket. "Thank you," she said again, her voice almost too soft to hear. "For everything." Before he could respond, she turned and slipped back into the small room, Echo at her heels. David stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, his heart pounding in his chest. In that single touch, that small gesture of trust, he felt something shift inside him. A quiet vow taking root in the hollow spaces he had never known were there. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments when the old fears came roaring back. But for tonight, he allowed himself a small, fragile hope, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just building empires out of steel and glass. He was building something far more important, a bridge between two souls who had spent too long in the dark. And in that bridge, he found a reason to keep going, one step at a time, into whatever tomorrow might bring. David didn't sleep that night. Not really. He found a chair in the small common area. The lights dimmed to a soft glow that left the shadows dancing across the worn wooden floor. He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet breathing of the city outside the windows. Occasionally he heard the distant wail of a siren or the low rumble of a truck on the road, but inside the shelter, it was calm, safe. He let his mind drift, replaying every detail of the past few days. He remembered the way Nia had looked at him when he'd first found her at the docks, the suspicion in her eyes that had slowly, cautiously, given way to something almost like hope. And he remembered the way she'd stood in that alley, her small body taut with defiance, refusing to let him be swallowed by the darkness. She had been a child standing against a world that had never given her anything, and she had done it without hesitation. That thought brought a tightness to his chest that wouldn't ease. As dawn began to tint the sky outside in soft pinks and muted gold, he rose and walked quietly to her door. He paused, listening. Inside, he could hear the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the soft thud of Echo's tail against the floor as he shifted in his sleep. A small smile curved David's lips. They were safe. For now, that was enough. He turned away and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at his skin. The city was just waking up, the streets still hushed, the scent of wet asphalt and salt lingering from the night's rain. David walked without direction, letting his feet carry him through the quiet streets. He thought about all the years he had spent chasing after the next big deal, the next headline, thinking that power and money were the answers to everything. But in these past few days, in the quiet strength of a girl who had nothing, he had found a truth he had been blind to for so long. People were more than the labels the world gave them. Success wasn't measured in bank accounts or boardroom victories. It was measured in the quiet, steadfast choices we made to stand by each other, even when no one was watching. He stopped at a small cafe just opening its doors, the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee curling through the air. He ordered 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag filled with warm rolls, thinking of Nia and the way her eyes had softened just a little when she'd taken the first sip of soup the night before. When he returned to the shelter, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her knees drawn up to her chest. Echo curled beside her. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded but curious. "Morning," he said softly, holding up the bag. "I brought breakfast." Her eyes flickered to the bag, then back to his face. "Why?" she asked, the single word heavy with uncertainty. "Because everyone deserves a warm meal to start the day," he said gently. "And because I thought you might like it." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He handed her the bag and one of the cups of coffee. She took them carefully, her fingers brushing his for a moment before retreating. She sipped the coffee slowly, her eyes closing for a brief second as she savored the warmth. "It's good," she said finally, her voice almost shy. "Better than anything I've had in a long time." "I'm glad," David said, sitting in the chair across from her. "You deserve good things, Nia. You deserve to be seen." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Instead, she tore off a small piece of bread and held it out to Echo, who accepted it with a gentle wag of his tail. "What happens now?" she asked after a moment, her voice quiet but steady. David took a breath. Now we figure out what you want," he said. "I can help you find a more permanent place to stay, if you want, somewhere safe. And if you're willing, I can help you go back to school, or find something you'd like to do, but only if you're ready." She frowned slightly. "I don't know if I am," she said. "I've been on my own for so long. I don't know if I can fit into the world like everyone else." "That's okay," David said gently. "You don't have to have it all figured out today. We take it one step at a time, and I'll be here for every step, if you want me to be." For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes distant. Then she looked at him, something in her gaze shifting, softening. "Why?" she asked again, and this time the question wasn't sharp, wasn't defensive. It was soft and aching, the question of a child who had learned too soon that nothing came without a price. "Why do you care so much?" David's throat tightened. He thought of all the years he had wasted, all the chances he had let slip by. He thought of Eliza, and the way he had let her slip through his fingers because he hadn't known how to be the father she needed. "Because once," he said, his voice low and rough, "I had someone in my life who needed me to care, and I didn't. I let her down. I don't want to make that mistake again." Nia studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly she reached out and set her small hand over his, her touch light but real. "Okay," she said softly. I'll try." And in that quiet promise, David felt something deep inside him settle. He squeezed her hand gently, not needing to say anything more, because in that moment, he knew that hope wasn't something you gave to someone else. It was something you built together, one fragile brick at a time, and together, they would keep building, no matter how long it took. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of gentle rhythm neither of them had known in years. David would arrive at the shelter each morning, carrying fresh bread or hot soup, always careful to let Nia set the pace. Sometimes they would talk in low voices, about small things, safe things, how Echo liked to chase his tail in circles until he collapsed in a panting heap, or how the city looked from the roof of the shelter when the sun went down in streaks of purple and gold. Other times, they would simply sit in silence, sharing a quiet understanding that words weren't always needed. David learned quickly that trust wasn't a straight line. It was a fragile bridge, built plank by plank. Some days, Nia would lean into it, telling him about the nights she'd spent huddled under bridges, the names of the few kind souls who'd slipped her half a sandwich or a blanket when the winter winds bit deep. Other days, she would pull back into herself, her eyes clouding with memories she wasn't ready to share. David never pushed. He let her decide how much to give, how much to hold back. It was enough for him to be there, to show her that someone could be steady, that someone could stay. At night, he would return to the world he had built for himself, the penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a monument to the life he'd once thought was all that mattered. He would stand at the window, staring out at the glittering skyline, and think of her, a girl with eyes like storm clouds and a spirit that refused to be broken. And he would promise himself again and again, he would not fail her, not like he had failed Eliza. One morning, a week after he had first brought her to the shelter, he found her sitting on the low stoop outside, her knees pulled up to her chest, Echo pressed against her side. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary but open. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, about maybe trying to go back to school, if that's even possible." David felt a warmth bloom in his chest, gentle and bright. "It's more than possible," he said softly. "If that's what you want, I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." She nodded slowly, a crease between her brows. It's been so long," she murmured. "I don't know if I remember how to be normal." "There's no such thing as normal," David said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "There's just you, and you're already more than enough." She looked down at her hands, twisting a frayed thread on her jacket, and for a moment he thought she might argue. But then she looked up, and there was a flicker of something in her eyes, uncertain but determined. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll try." They spent the afternoon at the public library, the warm air inside smelling faintly of old books and lemon polish. David watched as Nia ran her fingers over the spines of the books, her eyes wide with something he couldn't quite name. Wonder, maybe, or the fragile echo of hope. She checked out a few books, a battered copy of The Secret Garden, a dog-eared book of poetry, and carried them close to her chest as they walked back to the shelter. "I used to like reading," she admitted in a small voice. "Before everything." "Then let's bring that back," David said. "One step at a time." That night, he stayed later than usual, sitting across from her as she read aloud from the yellowed pages of the book, her voice halting at first, then growing stronger with each sentence. Echo dozed at her feet, his tail occasionally twitching in his sleep. David listened, his eyes soft, as she lost herself in the words, in a world that was safer and gentler than the one she'd known. It was a small thing, but he could see the way it settled something inside her, the way it smoothed the hard edges of her defenses. When she finally closed the book, her eyelids heavy with sleep, she looked at him and gave a small, tired smile. "Thank you," she murmured, for listening." "Always," he said. "Always." As he left that night, he paused in the doorway, looking back at her curled under the worn quilt, Echo curled against her side. In that small room, lit by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, she looked peaceful. For the first time, she looked like a child, not a survivor, not a fighter, just a girl who deserved the simple, quiet moments of safety and warmth. And as he stepped out into the cold night, David felt something settle in his chest, a fragile but steady certainty. This was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. There would be setbacks and days when the old fears returned like ghosts in the dark. But he also knew that he wouldn't walk away. He would be there for every step, every stumble, every small victory, because she had already given him more than he could ever repay. She had given him a chance to be the man he should have always been. And he would not waste that chance. Not for anything. Winter settled into the city like a slow exhale, each night colder than the last. Frost crept along the edges of windows, and the breath of passers-by clouded the air in brief, shimmering ghosts. But inside the small shelter room, there was warmth. David had brought an extra quilt, soft and thick, and Nia wrapped it around herself like a shield against the world. Echo slept beside her, his paws twitching in dreams, his body a comforting weight against her legs. David visited every day. Some mornings he brought steaming cups of cocoa, the rich scent filling the room and pulling a small smile from Nia's lips. Other days he came with fresh notebooks and pencils, simple gifts that lit a quiet excitement in her eyes. "For school?" he had said gently, and she'd nodded, though he could see the worry flicker in her gaze. Worry that she wouldn't be enough, that she wouldn't fit. He never pushed. He let her hold the books in her hands, let her turn the pages and feel their weight. Slowly she began to write again, halting, careful words that spilled across the paper in a looping scrawl. Poems about the sea, about the quiet nights she spent watching the stars above the rooftops. Tiny stories about Echo, always there in the shadows, always loyal. David watched her fill the pages with something more than words, watched her write herself back into a world that had once tried to erase her. And in the quiet moments when she looked up at him with that searching, uncertain gaze, he told her with every breath that she mattered. One night, he found her in the common room, curled into an old armchair, with one of the library books balanced on her knees. The lamplight painted her features in soft gold, and for a moment, David saw not the girl from the alley, not the child hardened by years of survival, but simply Nia, young and bright, a spark waiting to catch. He sat down across from her, careful not to break the spell of the moment. "What are you reading?" he asked softly. She looked up, her eyes brighter than he'd ever seen them. "It's a story about a girl who gets lost," she said. "But she finds her way home in the end." David nodded slowly. "Do you like it?" I don't know, she admitted, her fingers tracing the edge of the page. I think I want to believe it, that people can find their way home, even if they're lost for a long time. His heart ached at the hope in her voice, so fragile and fierce all at once. I think that's true, he said. I think sometimes it just takes someone to remind you that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the people who see you, who stand by you no matter how far you've wandered. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the question in her eyes. Am I home now? The words were soft, uncertain, but they carried the weight of every silent night she'd spent alone, every doorway she'd curled into for warmth. David swallowed hard, his voice steady when he spoke. If you want it to be, he said. If you want to be here, then yes, this can be home. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. And in the hush between them, something settled, like the final piece of a puzzle slipping into place. The next morning, David found her in the small kitchen of the shelter, helping the silver-haired woman with the breakfast trays. She moved carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration as she learned how to crack eggs without spilling them across the counter. David watched from the doorway, his chest tight with quiet pride. She was trying. She was building something new, one careful moment at a time. When she saw him, her lips curved in a small, shy smile. I'm helping, she said softly. I wanted to give back. You don't owe anyone anything, David said gently. You've already given more than enough. She shook her head. I want to, she said. I want to be more than just someone who needs help. He stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You already are, he said. More than you know. That night, as the city's first real snow fell in soft, silent drifts, David sat with her by the small window in her room. They watched the flakes swirl and dance outside, the world beyond the glass made clean and new under the soft white glow. I've never seen snow like this, she said quietly, her breath fogging the glass. It's like everything's starting over. It can be, David said softly. If that's what you want? She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she turned to him, her expression solemn and brave. I want to try, she said. I want to start over. David reached out, his hand warm against hers, and nodded. Then we will, he said. Together. In the hush of the falling snow, with Echo sleeping peacefully at their feet, they sat side by side, two people who had spent too long in the dark, finding light in each other's quiet, steady presence. And though he knew the road ahead would be long, he also knew this. They had already taken the first step, and that was enough. The snow kept falling, blanketing the city in soft white, erasing the hard edges of the streets and alleyways. For the first time in years, David found himself pausing to watch it, to let the cold air sting his cheeks and the quiet wonder of the snowfall seep into his bones. It felt like a new beginning, fragile and beautiful, and he clung to that feeling with everything he had. Each day he returned to the shelter. Each day he found Nia a little more open, a little less guarded. They began to share small rituals, cups of cocoa steaming in the cold mornings, long walks along the river where the snow lay untouched and pure. Echo always trotted beside them, tail wagging, his presence a steady comfort. One evening, as they walked past the frozen river, Nia stopped and looked out at the ice, her breath puffing in small clouds. When I was little, she said, her voice low, I used to think the world ended wherever the water met the sky. Like there was nothing else beyond it. David watched her, the faint lamplight glinting in her dark eyes. And now? He asked gently. She was silent for a moment, then turned to him, her gaze thoughtful. Now I think, maybe there's more, she said. Maybe there's always been more. I just couldn't see it. You see it now? He said softly. She gave a small nod, her gloved hands tucked deep in her coat pockets. Yeah, she whispered. I think I do. They walked back in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots. Back at the shelter, the silver-haired woman greeted them with a warm smile. You look happier, she said to Nia as she handed her a bowl of hot soup. Nia blushed, ducking her head. Maybe, she said shyly. I'm trying. That's all anyone can do, the woman said, her smile gentle. David watched the exchange, his chest tightening with something that felt like hope. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, nights when the old fears would come creeping back. But he also knew that she wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Later that night, David sat with Nia in the small room she now called hers. She had started to add little touches, her few books lined neatly on the windowsill, a scarf she'd found at the shelter's donation box hanging from a nail on the wall. Echo lay sprawled at her feet, his belly rising and falling with each contented breath. "I've been thinking," Nia said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her chipped mug. About the future, about school maybe, or something else. "Whatever you want," David said gently. "We'll figure it out together." She looked up at him, her brow creased. What if I mess it up?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "What if I'm not enough?" David leaned forward, his eyes steady and kind. "Nia," he said softly, "you've already proven you're enough. Every day you prove it, just by getting up, by trying again. That's more than enough." She looked down, her lips pressed together. "I don't know," she whispered. "I still feel like the girl in the alley sometimes. Like I'm always waiting for someone to tell me to go away." "I know," David said quietly, "and I wish I could take that feeling away. But what I can do, what I promise I will always do, is remind you, every day, that you're wanted, that you're seen." She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a breath, she said, "Thank you." He smiled, though his eyes were damp. "No," he said. "Thank you, Nia, for letting me be here." She gave a small, shy smile, then reached down to scratch Echo behind the ears. "He believes you," she said softly. "He trusts you." "Then I'll make sure I'm worthy of that," David said, "for both of you." They sat there until the soft tick of the old clock on the wall marked the hour. Finally, Nia rose, stretching her arms above her head. I think I'm ready for bed," she said. "It's been a long day." "Of course," David said, standing with her. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Promise?" she asked, her voice a quiet thread. "Promise," he said, and he meant it. As he stepped out into the cold night, he let the snow settle on his shoulders, let the quiet of the world seep into his thoughts. He thought of how far they had come in such a short time, of the girl who had once hidden behind dumpsters and refused to meet his eyes, now standing taller, her voice steadier, her dreams growing in the light of each new day. And he knew, as he walked away from the shelter that night, that this was only the beginning, that no matter how long it took, he would be there for every step of her journey, because she had given him a second chance, not just to save her, but to save himself, and he wouldn't waste it. Not this time. Spring crept into the city slowly, shy and uncertain after the long, harsh winter. Buds pushed through the cold earth, and the air smelled of wet concrete and new life. David felt the change in the rhythm of the days, the way the sun lingered a little longer in the sky, the way the city seemed to exhale, letting go of the cold. Nia changed too. Little by little, he saw it in the way she walked. Her head held a fraction higher, her shoulders no longer hunched against a world that had taught her to stay small. She started to smile more, real smiles that reached her eyes. She started to talk about tomorrow as if it was a place she could go, a place she was allowed to dream about. One bright afternoon, he found her sitting on the low stone wall near the river, a pencil in hand, her battered notebook open on her knees. Echo dozed beside her, soaking in the warm sun. David sat next to her, careful not to interrupt the quiet focus on her face. "What are you writing?" he asked after a moment. She looked up, her eyes bright. "Just things I see," she said softly. "People walking by, the way the sun makes the water sparkle, Echo chasing a stick." And she paused, a small, self-conscious smile pulling at her lips. "It feels like collecting pieces of the world, pieces I didn't think belonged to me." David reached out, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They do," he said. "Every piece, every moment." She looked at him for a long time, her expression open and vulnerable. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "Because I see it every time I look at you. The world has always belonged to you, Nia. You're just starting to claim it." She ducked her head, a flush of color rising in her cheeks. "It still feels scary," she admitted. Like I'm waiting for the day it all falls apart again." "I know," David said softly, "and maybe some days will be harder than others. But you're not alone anymore. That makes all the difference." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Thank you," he said in return, for reminding me what really matters. The days stretched on, each one brighter and softer than the last. David worked quietly behind the scenes, meeting with lawyers and counselors, making sure the shelter had the resources it needed, making sure Nia would never have to wonder if there was a place for her in this world. He never told her how many hours he spent in cold conference rooms, or how many times he refused to let her name be just another case file in a stack of forgotten papers. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the way she started to laugh again, the way her voice grew steadier when she spoke. One afternoon, she stood in front of a small group at the shelter, a circle of kids not much younger than she was, each one carrying their own quiet weight. She read one of her poems aloud, her voice trembling but strong. David watched from the doorway, his chest tight with pride. "We're not invisible," she read, her words soft but clear. "We're here, and we're not going anywhere." When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, then broke into soft applause. She flushed, looking down at the notebook, but there was a small smile tugging at her lips. Later, when he walked her back to her room, she slipped her hand into his for just a moment. "I feel like maybe I can be more than just the girl from the alley," she said softly. "Like maybe I can be something else." "You already are," David said, his voice thick. "You're hope. You're everything." That night, as he stood at the window of his penthouse, the city lights stretched out before him in a soft, shimmering sea. He thought about the way her laughter had sounded, light and real, a song he never wanted to stop hearing. He thought about the quiet strength she carried in every step, the way she refused to let her past define her. And he thought about the promise he had made to her in the cold hush of a winter night, that he would never let her become invisible again. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle around him. He knew the road ahead would be long. There would be challenges and setbacks, nights when the old fears returned like ghosts in the dark. But there would also be mornings like this, bright with promise, alive with the quiet certainty that they had both found something worth fighting for. A new beginning, a chance to be more, a chance to be whole. And in that promise, in that quiet, steadfast hope, David knew that he and Nia would keep walking forward, together. Always. As the final page of this story turns, we're left with a quiet reminder that the smallest act of kindness can save a life, and the simplest promise can rebuild a soul. Nia and David found each other in the dark, and together they forged a light no storm could ever snuff out. In their journey, we see that hope doesn't need a grand gesture, just someone willing to stand by your side and say, "I see you." We hope this story has touched your heart as much as it touched ours. If it has, please let us know. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience, compassion, and the quiet power of human connection. Thank you for watching. And remember, no one is invisible when someone chooses to see them.